What if I told you that time has a race? Time has a race. Time has a race.
What the fuck?
A race in the contemporary way that we understand race in the United States.
Okay, I'm going to listen to this craziness, but this seems to be setting up a begging the question fallacy.
Typically, we talk about race in terms of black and white issues.
But that's a dichotomy that's been directly built by academia. There's no real white issues. I mean, there is in the sense of white nationalists and white supremacists, but those groups amount to so few people that it doesn't matter. The amount of, for example, Black Lives Matter supporters vastly dwarf anything that has to do with a white nationalist movement in the United States.
In the African American communities from which I come, we have a long-standing, multi-generational joke about what we call CP time, or colored people's time. Now, we no longer refer to African Americans as colored, but this long-standing joke about our perpetual lateness to church, to cookouts, to family events, and even to our own funerals remains.
Okay, but that's just a stupid stereotype that you've put into your own population as a joke. I have a similar type of phrase from my father. We call it dad time. He used to say, "Hey, I'll be home in 5 minutes," and then he'd be home an hour later. This isn't actually time, right? There's no race to this. The community you're in isn't late to church and things because of the color of their skin. I don't know if I have to explain this, but but that's not how that works.
But today, I want to talk to you more about the political nature of time.
Oh my god. Okay, time doesn't have a political nature. Just, here's one definition. Time, the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. Now, you can take any part of that to make your claim for anything. But it's just time. It isn't affected by human politics. Humans within it can be affected by their own politics, but time doesn't care.
For if time had a race, it would be white.
And if the moon spoke a language, it would be Swahili. What the fuck are you talking about?
Nilianza kujifunza Kiswahili ya muda mfupi baada ya semester yangu ya kwanza kuwa mwanafunzi katika chuo kikuu cha Maryland, na wakati huo nilikuwa nikijifunza Kifaransa, Kitaliano na Kihispania. Mtu mwingine lakini aliyekuwa kwa bahati mbaya, na pamoja sisi tuliumba
White people own time.
Indian people own sight. Look, two can play at this game.
I know. Making such quote-unquote incendiary statements makes us uncomfortable.
But it's not even a statement that's inherently incendiary. It's just a statement that doesn't mean anything. Again, it's like saying something like Eskimos own snow. Like, it doesn't mean anything. You're not saying anything. When you say white people own time, that literally means absolutely nothing. Nobody owns time, and certainly not because of their skin color.
Haven't we moved past the point where race really matters? Isn't race a heavy-handed concept?
I don't know what you mean by really matters. You're going to have to define that, and I know you don't in this video. So I don't know what you mean by really matters. It really matters to you, but it probably doesn't really matter to as many people as you think it does. Further, I mean, the main people that talk about it so much are people that directly make money off of it. People who don't talk about it as much tend to do better in life because they're not so focused on identity politics.
Shouldn't we go ahead with our enlightened progressive selves and relegate useless concepts like race to the dustbins of history? How will we ever get over racism if we keep on talking about race?
Well, that would seem to follow if everyone's not harping on and on and on about race, or how racist time is, or how racist X, Y, and Z is. Then you would think that that would mean that you're in a world without racism.
Perhaps we should lock up our concepts of race in a time capsule, bury them, and dig them up in 1,000 years, peer at them with the clearly more enlightened, raceless versions of ourselves that belong to the future. But you see there, that desire to mitigate the impact of race and racism shows up in how we attempt to manage time.
Okay, since this might be one of the stupidest things anyone's ever said in a TED Talk, I'm going to break this into 3 sections. 1. The first part. Perhaps we should lock up our concepts of race and put them in a time capsule and bury them. Okay, first, this is a time capsule, what you've done here. So your video saying that time is white and time is racist, that's now in a time capsule. So like, and me saying you're an idiot for doing this, is also in a time capsule. People in the future will look back and go, wow, look at these idiots. What the hell are they talking about? They're talking about time being a race. They're talking about time being racist. Yeah, they're going to do the same thing I'm doing and going, what the hell are these idiots talking about? This is a massive waste of time. Number 2, dig them up in 1,000 years and peer at them with the enlightened and raceless version of ourselves. Whether the future is raceless or raceful or racist or non-existent doesn't really matter, and it's completely inconsequential to the topic at hand. Time isn't racist, though. Number 3, but you see the desire to mitigate the impact of race and racism shows up in how we attempt to manage time. Well, hey, look at that. Look what's back already. That pesky fallacy just doesn't seem to want to go away this time around.
Now, when Barack Obama became president of the US in 2008, many Americans declared that we were post-racial. I'm from the academy, where we're enamored with being post-everything.
Oh yeah, tell me more about academia.
We're postmodern, we're post-structural, we're post-feminist. Post has become a simple academic appendage that we apply to a range of terms to mark the way we were. But prefixes alone don't have the power to make race and racism a thing of the past. The US was never pre-race. So to claim that we're post-race when we have yet to grapple with the impact of race on Black people, Latinos, or the indigenous is disingenuous.
Okay, but the impact of having a race on certain races, I don't know why Latino's in there, Latino's not a race, but even if you were going to include them as a race, which is weird, it's like saying Muslims are a race. If you were going to include them in being a race, the impact that race has had on them has nothing to do with the society being post-racial. Like, those are 2 separate things. Simply because you haven't figured out what the impacts of their races were on them before it was post-racial doesn't mean it's not post-racial. I'm not saying it is post-racial, but your argument doesn't make any sense.
Just about the moment that we were preparing to celebrate our post-racial future, our political conditions became the most racial they've been in the last 50 years.
Which was highly unnecessary and mostly fueled by media propaganda being used in order to gather headlines and earn more money off an unsuspecting public.
So today, I want to offer to you 3 observations about the past, the present, and the future of time as it relates to the combating of racism and white dominance.
White dominance of what? If you're only talking about race relations in the United States, then you've got to stop. Like, it's not going to help you. You keep changing subjects every 2 minutes. You were just talking about impacts of race of specific minority groups within the United States in the past, and now you're talking about wanting to give advice on the past, the present, and the future on how time is relating to combating racism and white dominance in race relations. These are totally different things. They're not the same at all. Just pick one fucking topic and stick on the topic. Why are you jumping around? This shouldn't be this complicated.
First, the past. Time has a history, and so do black people. But we treat time as though it is timeless.
We treat time as though it was timeless. What the fuck are you talking about? No, we don't. No, we don't treat time like it is timeless. That doesn't even make any sense. That's like we treat space as if it was spaceless. What? Unbelievable.
As though it has always been this way. As though it doesn't have a political history bound up with the plunder of indigenous lands, the genocide of indigenous people, and the stealing of Africans from their homeland.
Holy fucking shit. This is insane. Okay, time has nothing to do with it. What the fuck are you talking about? It's like you're talking about the history of colonialization, and not even that. You're leaving out massive gaps of political history and just assuming that this should be what everybody's focused on in race relations, which is completely ridiculous. This is an academic. This person has a doctorate. This is one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life. Like, this is insane. This is actually insane. And if she thinks she's helping anything, I don't even... This is blowing my mind. If this is race relations in the United States is screwed. Like, time is racist to people that aren't white. Even if you're looking at it from a very specific couple hundred years in United States history, this is insane.
When white male European philosophers first thought to conceptualize time and history, one famously declared, "Africa is no historical part of the world."
Whoa, 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 whoa. What happened to American race relations? Why are we looking at Hegel? Hegel was a German philosopher in the 1800s. This has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Unless you are actually that racist, this has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
He was essentially saying that Africans were people outside of history who had had no impact on time or the march of progress.
No. Again, this is something social justice warriors love to do. They love to take a part of a quote and then pull it out of context to try and prove their own point. Let's read all of that section around what Hegel said. So, Hegel wrote, "In Negro life, the characteristic point is the fact that consciousness has not yet attained to the realization of any substantial objective existence, as for example, God or law, in which the interest of man's volition is involved and in which he realizes his own being. The Negro, as already observed, exhibits the natural man in his completely wild and untamed state. We must lay aside all thought of reverence and morality, all that we call feeling, if we would rightly comprehend him. There is nothing harmonious with humanity to be found in this type of character. At this point we leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. Egypt will be considered in reference to the passage of human mind from its eastern to its western phase, but it does not belong to the African spirit. What we properly understand by Africa, it's the unhistorical, undeveloped spirit, still involved in the conditions of mere nature, and which had to be presented here only as on the threshold of the world's history." Hegel, Philosophy of History. What Hegel is saying is that the history of progress made by humanity so far had been moving from east to west. It's where all history had come from. This isn't to say Africa had no history. It's to say that in progression towards what they saw as rationality and reason had not occurred outside of Egypt in Africa. And he's correct. There was no written history. Anything that was passed down wasn't passed down particularly well, as the civilizations didn't really grow very much and they hadn't really changed much over the hundreds of years. Whereas there was very big changes in the Asian cultures, in the Middle East, in Europe. There was massive changes occurring that just weren't happening in Africa. They just weren't there.
This idea that black people have had no impact on history is one of the foundational ideas of white supremacy.
I don't know what you mean by black people have had no impact on history. The history of what? Black people have had a shit ton of impact on the history of black people. And up until that point, the 1800s where you're looking at Hegel, black people hadn't had a particularly huge impact on the culture of Europeans. That's what he's talking about. Or Asians, for that matter. So I don't really know what your point is here. Nobody has ever argued that black people have had no impact on history. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I don't know if you can't read, but what are you talking about?
Now, we also see this idea that black people are people either alternately outside the bounds of time or stuck in the past in a scenario where, much as I'm doing right now, a black person stands up and insists that racism still matters, and a person, usually white, says to them, "Why are you stuck in the past? Why can't you move on? We have a black president. We're past all that."
Or maybe you're stuck in a future of your own making where there is always going to be racism because you won't let it go. Maybe we're just doomed to always be tribal. Or maybe that people have catched on to a really easy way to make money by causing conflict within social groups. That's also been happening for generations.
William Faulkner famously said, "The past is never dead. It's not even past."
And Cicero said, "To be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain always a child. For what is the worth of human life, unless it is woven into the life of our ancestors by the records of history?"
But my good friend, Professor Christy Dotson, says, our memory is longer than our lifespan. We carry, all of us, family and communal hopes and dreams with us.
Yeah, and it's all about whenever you start putting some of your ancient hates aside and moving into the future. As I can quote going back to my family's homeland in Scotland, William Wallace, quote, "To Edward I cannot be a traitor, for I owe him no allegiance. He is not my sovereign, he never received my homage, and whilst life is in this persecuted body, he shall never receive it. I'm William Wallace, and the rest of you will be spared. Go back to England and tell them Scotland is free." Now, if you know history, Scotland was not free for very much longer. But it doesn't matter. Scottish people still went on to thrive, went on to do quite well, went on to be even extreme warriors in the British armies.
We don't have the luxury of letting go of the past. But sometimes our political conditions are so troubling that we don't know if we're living in the past or we're living in the present. Take, for instance, when Black Lives Matter protesters go out to protest unjust killings of black citizens by police, and the pictures that emerge from the protest look like they could have been taken 50 years ago.
No, but they don't, though. That's the thing. Anything that they have in common with protests of the past in a visual form is being done on purpose for propaganda reasons. That's it. That's all the media is trying to do. We know this, and we can see right through it. It's not the politics causing it, it's the propaganda.
The past won't let us go, but still, let us press our way into the present. At present, I would argue that the racial struggles we are experiencing are clashes over time and space. What do I mean? Well, I've already told you that white people own time. Those in power dictate the pace of the workday. They dictate how much money our time is actually worth.
No. People in power don't dictate how much time is worth. That's not how that works. It's market driven. I have friends whose time is worth $5 an hour. Actually less. Actually, my time right now is probably worth about $5 an hour, just based on how much time I spend doing things like YouTube. And I don't really make money off of YouTube. But I have friends who make huge sums of money, but spend lots of time working. But their time is worth a lot because that's how much production they make. They don't have anybody watching over them. It's just what they can develop in the market is worth that much money. And there's nobody in charge. I mean, they're following rules that are set up within the society, agreed upon by people within the society, as far as they can within a democratic society. But there's nobody in charge of them. Anybody, it doesn't matter what their skin color is. In fact, my friends that make the most money, personally, aren't white people, or they're part white people. Like they don't look like white people. So this is insane. This makes no sense whatsoever. This isn't true.
And Professor George Lipsitz argues that white people even dictate the pace of social inclusion. They dictate how long it will actually take for minority groups to receive the rights that they have been fighting for.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're just going by the fact that people with white skin color make up the majority of the people in the country, and they're the people that vote on what social programs are happening, and if there's ones that are specifically needed to people with certain skin colors, then yes, then white people would be dictating that, wouldn't they? But this isn't some extreme logic. This is, like, obvious. It'd be like if I was in China going, oh, look, the Chinese people, they're the ones that seem to make the rules. It's like, well, yeah, they're the majority.
Let me loop back to the past quickly to give you an example. If you think about the civil rights movement and the cries of its leaders for freedom now, they were challenging the slow pace of white social inclusion. By 1965, the year the Voting Rights Act was passed, there had been a full 100 years between the end of the Civil War and the conferral of voting rights on African American communities.
But what you're talking about specifically is disenfranchisement in southern states in the United States, which were typically ones that lost the war that you're talking about. Now, I'm not saying that this is correct. In fact, I think the majority of those southern states were acting against their own best interest in what they ended up doing. But you can also see where they're coming from. They fought and lost a war, and they're doing everything in their power to mitigate what they saw as the negative effects of losing that war. Again, I'm not saying they're correct. I'm just saying that the whole fact that it was done as a war makes it worse for bringing together social cohesion, not better.
Despite the urgency of a war, it still took a full 100 years for actual social inclusion to occur.
So I don't know why you're saying, like, oh, look, we sped this up by having a war, and we thought that this would make it go faster. It's like, no. That's going to make it go much, much slower.
Since 2012, conservative state legislatures across the U.S. have ramped up attempts to roll back African American voting rights by passing restrictive voter ID laws and curtailing early voting opportunities. This past July, a federal court struck down North Carolina's voter ID law, saying it, quote, targeted African Americans with surgical precision.
Now, you say this is being racially pushed, but I see this as more being politically pushed, and not in a racial way, more in a political way. Now, as you mentioned, it's conservative and specifically Republicans pushing legislation like this, and in almost everywhere that I read, it seems like they're doing this to try and keep people generally from voting, especially in big cities. But I don't think they're necessarily targeting black people in particular. It's just the demographics of cities is way more heavily African American than are the rural areas. So, for example, I'm looking here at Fayetteville, as a percentage. The city is 46% white, but it's also 42% African American. So that's pretty close. And those populations, where it's that even, quite overwhelmingly vote in favor of Democrats. But it's also white people who are missing out. So it's not just black people who miss out on voting, it's also white people as well in these things. But it's targeting cities and large population densities, and it's being done by Republicans to try and keep people from voting generally. But I don't think they care so much if it's African American or not African American. I mean, you can make the case that African Americans vote more for Democrats, which is true. I'm still not totally sure why, because they don't seem to help African Americans very much. But just generally, they seem to. But I don't think it's necessarily African Americans. I think they're targeting cities in general because people in the big cities tend to vote Democrat more than people in rural areas.
Restricting African American inclusion in the body politic is a primary way that we attempt to manage and control people by managing and controlling time.
Okay, nothing in that sentence made any sense. That restricting African Americans from the body politic is a primary means we restrict people by managing and controlling time, which isn't correct. That's none of that is correct. None of that sentence makes any sense whatsoever. As I pointed out, it is managing and controlling people, sort of, but what it seems to be is Republicans trying to dissuade people in big cities that are Democrat from voting. It doesn't really matter to them so much whether they're African American or not. Those are just the people that seem to be voting against the Republicans. So they don't really care.
But another place that we see these time-space clashes is in gentrifying cities like Atlanta, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C. Places that have had Black populations for generations. But now, in the name of urban renewal and progress, these communities are pushed out in service of bringing them into the 21st century. Professor Sharon Holland asked, what happens when a person who exists in time meets someone who only occupies space?
Okay, but that's a stupid question because everybody on Earth both exists in time and occupies space, if they're alive. So the only way they could ever meet each other is if they existed in both time and space. By existing in time and space, they both have the ability to change the circumstances of what's around them. Some are better than others at it, some have more control over certain things than others, but they all have the ability to make changes to what's around them. So you can't remove agency from one group and put it all onto another group and then base that based on skin color, otherwise you're just a racist. That's it, that's all you are.
These racial struggles are battles over those who are perceived to be space takers and those who are perceived to be world makers. Those who control the flow and thrust of history are considered world makers who own and master time. In other words, white people.
Oh my god, no. Nothing to do with time. In fact, we're not even totally sure what time is still. Like, we're still working on this. It's not set in stone. White people don't own this. A black person could come by tomorrow with a better theory, and we wouldn't be like, oh, it's because of white people. No. There's lots of people still trying to figure out what's actually happening on Earth right now. You can join in if you want, or you can keep complaining about skin color. Like, fuck me. Here, I'm just gonna play you one guy on the internet, Styx Hexenhammer 666, and just one video he made about time, and nothing to do with white people. This is Vedics and Buddhists and their thoughts on time. This is just part of it.
The way in which we view existence itself is essentially completely and utterly wrong. And that even more enlightened systems, sometimes from the East, sometimes from other cultures, pagan cultures mainly, even those more accurate or sensible systems of measuring time really don't quite do it. And I want to look at specifically two types of time that are spoken of, and those are the Vedic peoples and the Mayans. Within Vedic lore, there's the idea that there's an oscillation or cycle or whatever you want to call it between the High Age downwards to Kali Yuga, which is what most of them proclaim us to be in now, and then back up to the Golden Age, to Satya Yuga. The Mayan system's different. The Mayan system works like a bunch of geared wheels interlocking and affecting one another. You could be in a very good high cycle period, but a very bad lower cycle period, which causes that ultimately it's still going to be more positive, but there will be negative aspects. And there are at least 4 gears within the system that we know of.
But when Hegel famously said that Africa was no historical part of the world, he implied that it was merely a voluminous landmass taking up space at the bottom of the globe. Africans were space takers. So today, white people continue to control the flow and thrust of history, while too often treating black people as though we are merely taking up space to which we are not entitled.
Well, we'll put it this way, somebody that's on a stage giving a lecture about how time is racist, yeah, that's somebody taking up space. Sorry, it is. And time, too.
Time and the march of progress is used to justify a stunning degree of violence towards our most vulnerable populations, who, being perceived as space takers rather than world makers, are moved out of the places where they live in service of bringing them into the 21st century.
That doesn't make any sense. Everybody is a space taker and a world maker. Everyone. There is no delineation here. The delineation that you use by Hegel doesn't even represent what you're saying.
Shortened lifespan, according to zip code, is just one example of the ways that time and space cohere in an unjust manner in the lives of black people. Children who are born in New Orleans zip code 70124, which is 93% white, can expect to live a full 25 years longer than children born in New Orleans zip code 70112, which is 60% black.
Oh my god, this is such a retarded view of it. A place isn't a place without the people in that place. This is what you're talking about with gentrification and stuff. What they're trying to do is entice people that are of a more pacifistic culture to move into more dangerous areas by trying to make it seem nicer. I don't know why you think this is a terrible thing. I'm looking right now at this list of the leading causes of death among black males, and between the ages of 35 and 34, the leading cause of death for males is homicides of black men. That's no other group in the United States is even close to that other than black males, and they're mostly in the types of areas you're talking about. Now, if we just took all those people and moved them to the other area code, do you actually think that's going to make it so that, like, these stats change? No, it's just going to screw up the new neighborhood, right? They have to have everything that the other people have built. They have to come in with a similar type of culture, or it's not going to work. You stupidly think that just being in that neighborhood will make them completely different people, will totally change their culture. That's not how it works. It's everything that's built into a family. It's, as you're saying, everything that's built into the history. You have to start building that history. That's what has to happen. It's not handed to you by other people.
Ta-Nehisi Coates argues that the defining feature of being drafted into the black race is the inescapable robbery of time. We experience time discrimination, he tells us, not just as structural, but as personal, in lost moments of joy, lost moments of connection, lost quality of time with loved ones, and lost years of healthy quality of life.
Oh my god, what are you talking about? The average life expectancy for a black person in the United States right now is 75.5 years. And the LA Times notes in a story from 2015 that black Americans are closing the life expectancy gap with whites in America. Meanwhile, in Africa, the life expectancy is 51 years for males and 54 years for females. Do I need to draw like 15 diagrams for this? Can I just point this out and go, you're an idiot? Like, whatever.
In the future, do you see black people? Do black people have a future?
Of course, black people have a future. Just as white people have a future, just as everybody has a future. As long as humanity exists, people have a future.
What if you belong to the very race of people who have always been pitted against time? What if your group is the group for whom a future was never imagined? These time-space clashes between protesters and police, between gentrifiers and residents, don't paint a very pretty picture of what America hopes for Black people's future. If the present is any indicator, our children will be undereducated, health maladies will take their toll, and housing will continue to be unaffordable.
Oh my God. Why do you keep changing your story? You you originally had it as time is racist, time is owned by white people. Then you've had it that white people have said that Black people had nothing to do with time and history. Now you're saying that time is against Black people. None of these things are the same thing. You have to stick to one fucking story. You can't build multiple layers of ridiculous stories. This, if anything is holding you back because of skin color, it's this nonsense. Just stop. What are you gaining? You're not gaining anything. There's no rights you're gaining from whinging like this. Nobody cares. If anything, all you're doing is making things worse. All you have to do is work. Like I've already proven, like there's one guy in here that's talking about different forms of time. Talk about time in a different way. Talk about doing something else. Talk about improving something. Holy shit. You're basically saying, look, we need to change how time works because it's owned by white people. You're an idiot.
So if we're really ready to talk about the future, perhaps we should begin by admitting that we're out of time.
No, you're not out of time at all.
We Black people have always been out of time. Time does not belong to us. Our lives are lives of perpetual urgency.
Okay, nobody's life is out of time, and everybody's life is in a state of urgency, especially these days where time is moving so much faster for what everybody is able to do and has time to do.
Time is used to displace us, or conversely, we are urged into complacency through endless calls to just be patient.
I don't know what you're talking about. You cannot be patient, but what are you not being patient for?
But if past is prologue, let us seize upon the ways in which we're always out of time anyway to demand with urgency freedom now.
You're already free.
I believe the future is what we make it. But first, we have to decide that time belongs to all of us.
That sentence doesn't make any sense. I can't decide who time belongs to any more than you can.
No, we don't all get equal time. But we can decide that the time that we do get is just and free. We can stop making your zip code the primary determinant of your lifespan.
Oh my God, your zip code is not the primary determinant of your lifespan unless you create the zip code as a shitty place to live a life. Fucking hell. I can't even... Oh. This is unbelievable.
We can stop stealing learning time from Black children through excessive use of suspensions and expulsions. We can stop stealing time from Black people through long periods of incarceration for nonviolent crimes.
See, these I kind of sort of agree with. I mean, it's really circumstantial, and it's probably down to, as she said, kind of shitty education systems that they've built in the places that they live. But yeah, what you need is you need the overall war on drugs to be gone. Then you need a much more friendly way of dealing with troubled kids. You need to completely overhaul the education systems, but I think most Western countries do, so that's not just an American thing. But you also need better parenting. You need more stable parents, and it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, the groups that they seem to want to bring in, such as the social justice groups, are groups that are going to make it worse. Much worse. Not even a little bit better. Much, much, much worse. So yeah, I agree with these particular points. I don't think that she's able to fix them. And I don't think the cultures that they're in are going to be fixed anytime soon either. I'm not saying they're not going to be fixed. They probably will be eventually, but it's not going to be soon.
The police can stop stealing time and Black lives through use of excessive force. I believe the future is what we make it. But we can't get there on colored people's time. or white time, or your time, or even my time. It's our time. Ours. Thank you.
And it's nobody's time. It's just time.
Time is on my side. Yes, it is.